Okay, Genesis 1 and 2 sets for us the conditions, the background for work, as well as something of God's purpose and intention for humanity, but it also sets the scene for the fall in Genesis 3. For in Genesis 3 we see humanity choosing to reject God's way to live as the gardeners in his paradise by choosing to follow the leadership of the evil one and striking out in autonomy. Of course, it wasn't autonomy, it was following the leadership of the evil one, for so many revolutionaries wind up just changing masters. So the whole of humanity wound up in our great revolution, changing masters from the loving God to the deceitful devil. We chose to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and so became the determiners ourselves of what we believe is good and what we believe is evil, living our own way rather than God's way. But the fall is not only rebellious, sinful humanity, it also refers to the consequential judgment of God upon us. For God changed the nature of the world in which we live, so that we could not eat the fruit of the tree of life and live forever. He drove us out of the garden and put a guard on the east side of the garden. And so that we would now live in the world of frustration, no longer enjoying marital harmony, significantly increasing the difficulty of our work, both in multiplying and filling the earth, for in pain will the women bring forth children, and also in gardening, for now by the sweat of our brow and thorns and thistles will grow. For now the work of subduing the world that was ours in the first place will be in a hostile environment. At the end of chapter 3, God appoints this guard on the east side of Eden. And then we read in chapter 4 verse 16, after Cain has killed his brother and is driven further away, we read, "Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden." From there we learn of work east of Eden. For Cain's family continues and expands the nature of human work. For we read in verse 20, and here's one of those passages you don't want to read because it's got all those names. Adar bore Jabal, and he was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tabal-Cain was Naamah. See, here's the continued expansion of the human family as they rule over the environment through their work. They make bronze, they make metals, they make music, they make instruments, And as we spread, filling the earth, it all comes to a sad interruption in the judgment of God upon humanity in the flood in chapters 6, 7, 8, 9. But once again we see humans expanding to fill the earth in chapters 9 and 10 as the different children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the genealogies, the generations of Noah, fill out across the nations of the world. And the world east of Eden is now the world that you and I live in and work in. There are still traces of the Edenic state here. We are still in the image and likeness of God, although disfigured in our image and distorted in our likeness and in need of renewal. We still work. We still take responsibility for the world. We still work socially, providing for each other, and we still care for each other's needs. Yet none of our efforts will succeed. Without God blessing our work in its effectiveness, nothing will succeed. He who sends the rain and the sun provides food from the earth, or blighting the world with drought and with flood. We keep on thinking that all that comes out of our labour is just and fair and right. We deserve. You've got those wonderful insurance policies, superannuation policy advertisements which talk about what you deserve. You can deserve all you like. The world doesn't work that way. And so the scripture says the hard-working farmer ought to have the first share of the crops. That's absolutely true, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen, because he could be in the floodplain and lose the lot. The world doesn't work like that. One lazy man may produce a crop, and the really hard-working man may lose his crop. The grasshoppers go this way and not that way. There's no certainty. But it's the Lord who makes the blessing upon us. So Psalm 127 says, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labour in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It's vain you rise up early and go late to rest, eating bread of anxious toil, for he gives his beloved sleep. One man plants, another man waters, but it's always God who gives the growth. We can never actually control the outcome of our endeavours. The world east of Eden may be hostile to our endeavours, but it's not hostile in the sense of having no productivity. It's not hostile in the sense of being beyond God's power to bless. Come with me to Psalm 104. Psalm 104. It's a long psalm, but we'll just pick up a couple of bits of it. You find on page 603, do you? No, pick it up verse 14 over the page. Talking to God. You cause the grass to grow for the livestock, and the plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth, and wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's hearts. The trees of the Lord are watered abundantly, the cedars of Lebanon that he planted. In them the birds build their nests. The stork has a home in the fir trees. Or come down to verse 27. These all look to you to give them their food in due season. When you give it to them, they gather it up. When you open your hand, they are filled with good things. When you hide your face, they are dismayed. When they take away their breath, they die and return to their dust. When you send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. We are very nervous, and understandably, of seeing God at work in the powers and forces of nature and creation. Our society has got rid of God talk out of public discourse. Our Prime Minister at least has the integrity of not praying for people in flood dangers, because she's become so publicly atheistic. That would at least be hypocritical. But we don't even pray for them now in public. So we replace God with nature, spelt with a capital N, or called Mother Nature. Well, she, of course, is cruel and hard and ruthless, without plan, without purpose, without control. In fact, she's not much of a god at all, but she's the only one we've got. But, of course, God does send floods, and God does send droughts. We mustn't back off from this and say, well, there's a natural causes to everything that God has nothing to do with. God supervises everything. Why he sends this particular flood or that particular, I don't know, unless he tells us. But that he is actively involved in it, I do know, and that is why I pray for him, as nearly everybody sitting on a roof surrounded by floodwaters was praying to him just a week or two ago without the permission of the Prime Minister. But the problems of the fallen world east of Eden prevail, and we continue in this rebellious sinfulness of our parents, and so God continues to frustrate our efforts and our works. And in our behaviour in every area of life, including and especially in our working life, we demonstrate both the symptoms of our disease, namely our sins, and the consequence of our disease, namely God's judgment upon us, frustrating us. That's why work is always hard work. It always will be. But we have two things. We have sin and sins. Sin is the disease that produces all kinds of sins. These are the minor expressions, as I call them, the minor expressions of our sin. And in our work, we're good at expressing our sinfulness with all kinds of sins, from crooked scales to second sets of accounts, from the sinful work itself, like theft or prostitution, to the sinful ways of doing righteous work, like lazy failure to provide properly for your clients or your customers or your employers or your employees or your colleagues. It can be in profiteering and in shortchanging. I mean, there are any number of ways in which we can lie, in which we can cheat in the marketplace. And there are so many ways in which we can ignore or abuse the needs of people around us in the workplace. Office politics, slander, backstabbing, gossiping. The only limits to the ways in which we can sin in the workplace is the lack of imagination amongst sinners. That's the only limit. From stealing from the tax man to forging details for the insurance man to writing up contracts in such language that people don't know the meaning of the word flood, it is endless the ways in which we can sin if we put our minds and hearts to it. And it's not just on one side of the industrial fence that we can see sin raise its ugly head. The bosses in their tyranny and the workers in their laziness can create a toxic environment of legal fighting and power politics through which nobody wins except the lawyers. And of course that's a profession that since Jarndyce and Jarndyce in Charles Dickens' Bleak House has been seen as the vultures of the commercial world anyway. There are no one who can get around the whole issue of sin in the workplace. Now, many of these matters are dealt with in the Scriptures. We're told not to steal, nor to bear false witness, nor to covet our neighbour's possessions. Furthermore, we love our neighbour as ourselves. And as we look more carefully into the law of Moses or into the book of Proverbs, there are clear instructions about the labourer deserving his hire and not holding back the wage that is owed to him overnight, as well as instructions about false scales and moving fence posts and being slothful or lazy. As we saw in the talk on creation, work is a social activity and requires social justice. So justice will be required of us for our failure to act properly in the world of commerce. Turn with me to the Ephesians, page 1178, Ephesians chapter 6. Ephesians 6. Verse 5, slaves, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart as you would Christ, not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but as servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, rendering service with a good will as to the Lord and not to man, knowing that whatever good anyone does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether he is a slave or free. Masters, do the same to them and stop your threatening, knowing that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there's no partiality with him. Now, I'm going to return to the issue of slavery in a moment or two, but notice how both the slave and the master can sin in their work and the way in which they relate to each other, and both of them are held accountable to God, both the slave and the master, for the work that we do. Or look at James chapter 5, James chapter 5, 1218, James 5. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the labourers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and self-indulgent. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned, you have murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. The Bible's pretty clear. We're going to be held accountable for what we do in the whole commercial industrial work that we're engaged in. The way you treat the tea lady in your office, the Lord Jesus Christ is paying attention to. The word that you got engaged in, the conversation that you got caught up in that kind of slander gossiping thing in the tea room, the Lord Jesus Christ was listening. We are accountable and answerable to him for what we do and how we do it. And we will be held accountable for what we do and how we do it. There's no point saying, well, everybody else was doing it. That's no excuse. There is no place there. You must act rightly in all industrial, commercial work environments that you are engaged in every way that we operate. Now, we have a law and government that restricts our sinfulness, creates an environment of justice where we can work with some sense of predictability and where we can invest our labour or our money and expect to be fairly rewarded. For we in Australia should not take for granted the centuries of generations who have taken the Christian understanding of law and covenant and applied it to our courts and to our parliaments to create the present marketplace that we enjoy. Pulling the plug on Christianity in our society is the way of emptying the water out of the bathtub. At the moment, we still have that Christian kind of concept of law and justice operating in our land. By the time your grandchildren are on this land and in this earth, unless something changes dramatically, it will be a completely different system. And no other one I know works as well as those influenced by Christian thinking in the first place. But before we move on to the major expressions of our sinfulness, let me say a couple of things about slavery in the Bible. For this is one of the greatest of the minor expressions of sinfulness. And it's confusing for people because in the 18th century it was the Christians who led the forefront of abolishing slavery, and yet the Bible talks about slavery, refers to slavery, almost seems to enjoin slavery. So, what can we say about slavery? I'm going to give you 7 quick points on slavery. Not a complete answer, but just 7 pieces of dust in the air that you need to remember if you're going to discuss slavery with friends or think about it sometime. Number 1, the word slavery covers a multitude of arrangements, from bonded service to ownership of another person as if they were an animal or an object. That is, you think when you're talking about slavery, you're thinking about one thing: Charlton Heston rowing in a Roman boat, being whipped. So you've got this image of slavery, but there's all kinds of slavery. Second thing, under different forms of slaves have quite different rights, or lack of rights. There's an American sociological historian called Rodney Stark, S-T-A-R-K. It's worth looking on the subject. He recounts the comparing and contrasting views of slavery in the Middle East and in the Western world, and the Muslim way and the Christian way of dealing with slaves, dramatically, radically different. There are no kinds of black African communities of slaves in the Middle East because they were slaves of Muslims that didn't allow them to breed. Whereas in the Americas, under Christian influence, they were allowed to have their own families, and so continued on. But there were many more slaves went to the Middle East than ever went to the Americas. It's just they were killed. There's different forms of slavery. Third thing, the 18th century African slave trade was terrible abuse of power, involved slave trading, that is, kidnapping people, which the Bible is universally and consistently against. 1 Timothy chapter 1 verse 10, if you want a verse for example. Fourthly, there are quite different reasons for people becoming slaves. There are economic slaves, debtors' prisons. You enter into a contract, you can't pay off the money, then you get taken into slavery and you have to work off your debts. There are prisoners of war. There are prisoners of crime. There are bonded workers, people who put themselves into a bond to work for 10 years on the grounds of what the boss is going to do for them. While we have, fifth one, while we today have more humane ways of depriving people of their rights and punishing them, such as our bankruptcy procedures, we still today incarcerate some people and put them to work. Terrorists, criminals, war criminals, and we still allow people to place themselves into bonded and indentured labour, which the ancient world would call a slave. Sixthly, the Bible instructions are extraordinarily humane, especially for their time, for they're mainly about giving limits to the duration of slavery and requiring masters to treat their slaves fairly and remember that they too have a master and give them their freedom after a certain number of years, 7 in particular. Seventhly, the New Testament does not see slavery as desirable. It calls it the yoke of slavery, and in 1 Timothy 6, and it tells people not to sell themselves into slavery in 1 Corinthians 7, and to take whatever opportunity for freedom they can get in 1 Corinthians 7. But it does also instruct slaves what to do if they've been converted and Christian. They are not to run away, they are not to mistreat their master, they are to fulfil their master's requirements. Now, as I said, this is in no 7 points or in no way a complete answer to the issue. But I think it's important when we come to passages like Ephesians 6, we're in a few moments ago, that we don't jump just straight from Ephesians 6 to employer-employee relationships. Ephesians 6 is about slaves and masters, and their relationship is different to an employee-employer relationship. They had to do what they had to do for whatever reason they were in the obligation to their master. It'd be better if you want to talk about employee-employer relationships that you look up the Bible word servant, because a servant was a free worker. A slave was somebody under some obligation to work. But it is also important to use Ephesians 6 to advise those who have become under obligation through debt or through a bond, and to consider carefully the injunction to the slaves, for that is a much closer parallel to them. One of my friends came to bankruptcy. He undertook to pay everybody back 100 cents in the dollar if they gave him time. For the next 25 years of his life, he paid off his debts. That's what he did. Now, that's an honourable thing to do. He was very fortunate that people were kind and gave him the freedom to pay it off all over these years, but he paid it off with interest because he felt obligated to do so and would not take other opportunities in life until he had fulfilled that requirement. Another friend was indebted to his government for 10 years to repay for his education in Australia. He could have skipped out on that obligation. Many people do, most people do. But as a Christian, he felt it was his duty to fulfil the contracted term of his service in full. And so only when he finished the 10 years did he turn aside from the government work that he had to do and pursue his own interests, namely to return to Australia and undertake a different degree altogether in order to work in a completely different industry, one that he actually liked, rather than the one that he'd sold his soul into in the first place. But there is something profoundly honourable about a man who, having given his word, lives out his 10 years in bonded service. And it's Ephesians 6, you see, that speaks in those terms. Well, enough of this slavery. Let's get back to return to the major expression of sin, which is what I want to be talking about. For the difference between sins and sin is the difference of symptom and disease. Now, if the world has any interest in sin at all, it generally is only interested in sins, concrete examples of individual sins. And they think that by dealing with these symptoms, they will eradicate or at least control evil in the world. But the disease that gives rise to these symptoms, the world doesn't understand, it doesn't recognise, and there's no solution to it. And so the world is constantly surprised by the persistent production of new symptoms called sins. Over and over again you can read a modern analysis of what's wrong with the world today, and they always come up with the same solution: more education, longer education, earlier education. Put that into the curriculum of education. Any school teacher here is sitting there with joy in their heart to finally hear someone speaking out the front saying, take things out of the curriculum. Stop shoving things in, for nothing that we've ever done in education has actually solved the problem of sin. If you get enough education, what you get is very well educated sinners. But you don't stop them being sinners by being well educated. Indeed, he might help them sin more effectively. So let's turn to the way that people use work to express the fundamental sin of rebellion against God by looking at the history of the great city from Babel's rise to Babylon's fall. Genesis 11 is where we kick off. For Genesis 11 shows us the descendants of Noah multiplying, filling the world, and turning their attention to dominion over the world by building a tower that would storm to heaven and make a name for humanity that could not be rivaled in the world, and keep them united as one mankind in rebellion against God, without being dispersed or scattered. I'm reading from Genesis 11. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words, and as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let's make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had some bricks for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let's build ourselves a city and a tower with its top to the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down and to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing they propose to do will now be impossible to them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the languages of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of the earth. You see what they were doing by their work? It's a direct rival to God. It's to establish for ourselves the name that really should be the name of God. To be able to establish for ourselves a name without God. And notice, just back in chapter 3, God drives them away further, lest they should eat the tree and live forever, or lest they should be able to do anything they want. For notice, because of our technology, because of our ability, notice what God says at the end of verse 6. Nothing they propose to do will now be impossible for them. God can't have sinful man living on for eternity, so he drives him away from the tree of life. God can't have man rivaling him as the ruler of the universe, and so he scatters us into our cultures and into our languages so that we really do not understand each other and cannot work together. Our tower building ability is so great that united mankind could rival God, which is not that surprising, because after all, we're made in the image of God to rule his world. And so our work is the powerful way for human sinfulness to express its rebellion against God. And over again, people try to unite humanity in this rebellion against God. From the United Nations to the make-up language Esperanto, from Alexander the Great to Julius Caesar and Genghis Khan, Napoleon and Hitler and Stalin, from Marxism and communism, from fascism and democracy. For the world is now supposed to be united on democracy as a system, even though it won't work. From the Olympic movement to the World Wide Web, from Facebook to Twitter, people try to unite humanity to be able to run the world without any reference to God. Now, not all these things are bad. Facebook, Twitter, I wasn't sure which side to put that on, the bad or the good list. Some are quite good. But all try to unite mankind without reference to God. And so they are all in defiance of God, placing man at the centre of the universe, that by his efforts and abilities he will be the master of all things, the ruler of the world, the captain of his own soul. And so we keep visiting the Tower of Babel as world globalisation increases, and power is increasingly concentrated into the hands of fewer and fewer people, of course. and local cultures, local languages are obliterated. It's interesting to see the power of American language on words like bikers and bikies, surfers and surfies, that the Australian dialect is actually being washed out by the continued intrusion of American language and American ways. Doesn't matter what you call them, but it's all part of this world globalisation where we become one humanity. But there's another stage in the Bible when the land of Shinar saw the rise of another mighty building set up against God, namely in the 6th century BC with the city of Babylon and its famous Hanging Gardens, and its proud and arrogant conquest and destruction of the city of God, Jerusalem, and the temple at the centre of the city of God on the Mount Zion. And this is the scene in our Bibles of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, of Jeremiah and Ezekiel, of the lowest and most desperate time in Judah's history. But it's also the events of Belshazzar's feast, writing on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, and of Cyrus and the return of the exile, and of Nehemiah and Ezra rebuilding Jerusalem. For the might of Babylon, which was so long in coming and so worldwide and powerful, actually only lasted about a century and came down as suddenly and as completely as the Berlin Wall, which really was a kind of, the USSR and the Eastern Bloc was a 70-year wonder, wasn't it? Between the Russian Revolution and the falling of the wall was about 70 years. At the time, in the height of the Russian Empire, well, they seemed invincible as they moved from one victory to another, as communism spread across the world and China fell into communism, and the first spaceship was a Russian spaceship with Sputnik, and then the first man, and then the winning of Olympic gold medals. The Eastern Bloc seemed to win them all the time, but then the end came. The wall collapsed by the power of people overnight. So Babylon was like it. Everything was under Babylonian control, but then overnight, this proud, arrogant community that rejected God and spat in his face, destroyed his holy temple, took his people as slaves, saw the king, poked his eyes out, the king of Israel. Suddenly, Babylon fell. Now, there are two passages about this Babylonian exile period that are really relevant to our understanding of work, and I want to draw your attention to them. The first one is in Jeremiah 29. Jeremiah 29. This is now being widely quoted amongst Christian circles, led by a particular famous preacher in New York, as being the basis of a Christian view of work and work in the city. I'm reading 14 verses, Jeremiah 29. These are the words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders of the exile. So he's writing from Jerusalem to Babylon, and to the priests, the prophets, and all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had taken away into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. This was after King Jeconiah and the queen mother, the eunuchs, the officials of Judah and Jerusalem, the craftsmen and the metal workers had departed for Jerusalem. The letter was sent by the hand of Elisar, and son of Shaphan, son of... This is what said, verse 4. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. For thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, do not let your prophets and your diviners who are among you deceive you, and do not listen to the dreams that they dream, for it's a lie that they are prophesying to you in my name. I did not send them, declares the Lord. For thus says the Lord, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will visit you, and I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for wholeness and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me. When you seek me with all your heart, I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations and all the places where I have driven you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back to the place from which I sent you into exile. Now today there are some people using this passage to argue for Christians seeing their work as seeking the welfare of their city. And the word welfare is the Hebrew word shalom, to seek the peace of the city, the good of the city. And so your work is a way of seeking the health and welfare of Sydney or New York. There is also even an attempt to make the city refer not to the whole metropolis, but just to the inner city, the central business district. And so come and work here in the city, and let's redeem this city. Let's create wealth and prosperity for the city. And come to my church, which is in the middle of the city as well. That's a useful... Get out of those suburban and those country churches. That's not where culture is. It's here in the centre of Sydney that we will redeem Sydney. As we redeem Sydney, we'll redeem the nation as well. And so you do it by your work, by being actively involved in the marketplace of here. And thus Christians in the marketplace of commerce are to act in such a way as to add the socio-economic values to the city. Redeem it by your work and career. My friends, it is a very sad misapplication of this passage of the Scriptures, but it growingly increasing. I hear it more and more in different places. So as we pass by, let me point out to you, Jeremiah is warning the exiles in Babylon against false prophets of his day, who were promising the imminent return from Babylon and the destruction of Babylon and the quick return to Jerusalem. Babylon is to have its day when it will rule, says God, and then it will be destroyed by God, says Jeremiah, in 70 years' time. Not in your lifetime, not in your children's lifetime, but in your grandchildren's lifetime, it'll be destroyed. And so what you must do now is have children so that they can have their children, so that you will have grandchildren when the day comes that Babylon is to be destroyed. So settle down, get a house, have a wife, have some children, have their children and get them married off, so that when the day comes there will be people to return from Babylon back into Jerusalem. Don't now be a fifth column in Babylon. Don't be the resistance movement in Babylon. It's a waste of space and time. Babylon is going to stand for 70 years. So how do you prosper? Well, just become part of Babylon, but keep having children and children's children. Be a people ready to leave Babylon in due time. For all our work is social work. If our city grows in wealth, well, we grow in wealth. And if our city is impoverished, we'll be impoverished. We want a nation to go back to Jerusalem, so be Babylonians for 3 generations. Settle down, seek Babylon's welfare as your own. But notice, it's not by your work that you're to do this. He actually says it by prayer. Put down your roots, have lots of children, seek Babylon's welfare, because it will be yours, and by your welfare there you will be able to return and shake the dust off your feet about Babylon. For God's eternal plans, God's future plans for Babylon are not wealth and redemption. God's future plans for Babylon are distraction and judgment. There's no peace or welfare permanently for the wicked city of Babylon. We're not to pray and work for Babylon's salvation or peace. You can't legitimately turn your commercial work into a critical part of God's plan for the salvation of Babylon from this passage. And if you can't do it from Babylon from this passage, you can't do it from Sydney from this passage or anywhere else. See, just think of the second passage about Babylon, one that you know because you sing. Well, you used to. Psalm 137. I'm sorry, some of you used to. Some of you have come to Christianity since we've stopped singing this song. So you've never sung it. Hands up those who have sung Psalm 137. Hardly any of you have ever sung it. We'll have a little quartet later. Psalm 137. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. Zion's the hill upon which Jerusalem is built. On the willows there in Babylon we hung up our lyres, for there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem, how they said, lay it bare, down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall he be who repays you with what you have done to us. Blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rocks. It's one of the most violent verses in the whole Bible. What is the Jerusalem, what is the Israelite view of the future of Babylon? It's not redemption. It's not by my working hard in Babylon I'm going to change the city into a better city and bring it the peace of God. The view of Babylon is, I am now in the punishment centre of God, and it itself one day will be punished, but I'm always going to remember heaven is Jerusalem. And that's where I'm going home. I'm not singing the songs of Babylon. I'm not going to improve Babylonian culture by introducing Israelite songs. How can I sing the songs of Israel in this wicked, degenerate city of Babylon that destroyed the temple of God in Jerusalem? No, no, no. That will never be the case. See, here is the Bible's verdict of Babylon and its future. Here is the Bible's verdict on those who get caught up in the work and welfare of Babylon and forget Jerusalem. For there were Jews who refused to go home. When Babylon started to fall, they said, no, we'd stay on under the new rulers, rather than go back to the rubble heap called Jerusalem and start from scratch again. I mean, I've got a nice home here in Babylon now, right down by the river, down by the canal. I've got my power boat and the kids are learning to water ski. Why would I want to go back to the hill country of Jerusalem when I've got my kids at the best Babylonian school? There is the great mistake to be had. The people of God were not called to work for the prosperity of Babylon, but to remember Zion, the hill of Jerusalem where the temple of God was built. That was their home, that was their city, that was their peace and prosperity. And they were to work in Babylon only so long as it required to have them as a nation able to return. But Babylon was the commercial centre of pagan arrogance that was to come to an end under the judgment of God. So turn with me to the book of Revelation and see it, Revelation 18. Been a hard morning's work, friends, hasn't it? But that's the Australia Day period of time. It's just warm in this part of the world, isn't it? But here is the home stretch as we look at this great passage in chapter 18 of Revelation, coming right up to the end of the book of Revelation and the judgment of God. After this I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright and with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She's become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. For all nations have drunk the wine of her passions, of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living." Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues. For her sins have heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back as she herself has paid back others, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double portion for her in the cup she has mixed. as she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her like a measure of tormenting and mourning, since in her heart she said, I sit as a queen, I am no widow, and mourning I shall never see. For this reason, her plagues will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine, and she'll be burnt up with fire, for mighty is the Lord God who has judged her. And the kings of the earth, who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her, will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning, and they will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, Alas, alas, you great city, you mighty city Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore. Cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearl, fine linen, purple cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, all kinds of scented wood, all kinds of articles of ivory, all kinds of articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, sheep, horses, chariots, and slaves, that is, human souls. The fruit for which your soul longed has gone from you, and all your delicacies and your splendours are lost to you, never to be found again. The merchants of these wares who gained their wealth from her will stand far off in fear and of her torment, weeping and mourning aloud. Alas, alas for the great city that was clothed in fine linen, in purple scarlet, adorned with gold and jewels and pearls. For in a single hour all this wealth has been laid waste. And all the shipmasters and seafaring men, sailors and all who trade is on the sea, stood far off and cried out as they saw the smoke of her burning. What city was like the great city? And they threw dust on their head as they wept and mourned, crying out, Alas, alas for the great city, where all who had ships at sea grew rich by her wealth. For in a single hour she has been laid waste. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has given judgment for you against her. It's an incredible picture of Babylon at the end, but it is the picture of the world economy. It is the picture of the global economy. It is the picture of the great city that can stand in defiance of God because it is so wealthy. Because, like the Tower of Babel, humans are able to run the world without God for a little while, for a little time. Because we can gather up the whole network of a system of social interactions by which we can control and run the environment in which God has placed us. Because we were created to rule the world, we are very able as rulers of the world. And so we have created wealth. But we have used our work and our creation of wealth not to serve God, not to care for his world, not to care for the peoples of this world, but to live independently of God, aggrandising ourselves with wealth and affluence and pleasures, with all the joys and the trinkets of the rich. You recognise Sydney in this description of Babylon? For we're not far off it, are we? And it's the floods in Queensland that got Brisbane to start loving each other again and caring for each other and doing something of a communal good, wasn't it? And it's the wealth and affluence of Australia and of Sydney that keeps us living in indifference to each other, ripping each other off, making as much money as we can. Wealth is powerfully seductive, comes out of our work. But if we haven't built our work on the basis of the God who created us, who is a worker God and a resting God, to work in relationship with each other and therefore with social justice, males and females together, one family working together to subdue the world for God, to care for the world as the gardener cares for his garden, if we're not working God's way, as a society and as a community, then we will work the Babylonian way. And we mustn't get seduced by Babylon. By the waters of Babylon I laid down my harp, and I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to sing their songs. I don't sing the songs of heaven for the pagan. I'm not an entertainment. They can come along and clap me and pay me for singing the songs of heaven. No. Heaven is for heaven. And we are to be singing the songs of heaven because we're the citizens of heaven. But how can the citizens of heaven live in the world today? Well, this morning's work is to set up the question for today's topic. That is, work in the life of a Christian.